Picture this with us. It's a Wednesday morning, January 15th, 1947. We're in Leimert Park, Los Angeles.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a cool, damp morning, the kind where the dew makes the pavement look a little slick and the air just feels heavy.
Right. And we're on the west side of South Norton Avenue, the 3800 block, to be exact.
Yeah.
It's a quiet kind of up-and-coming neighborhood. Some houses, but also a lot of vacant, undeveloped lots.
That post-war optimism is just starting to build things up.
Exactly. A perfectly normal morning in a city that's just bursting at the seams.
Mm-hmm.
And at about 10 o'clock in the morning, a local housewife named Betty Bersinger is walking down the street.
She's not alone. She has her 3-year-old daughter with her. They're just on the most mundane errand you can imagine. They're going to a shoe repair shop.
It's a normal day. But as Betty is walking past one of these vacant lots, something catches her eye in the weeds, something white. It's lying just a few feet from the sidewalk.
And we talk about this a lot, how the brain tries to protect us from seeing something truly awful. Oh, absolutely. It puts up a filter. Her brain tries to make sense of this strange shape, and the very first thing she thinks is, someone's dumped a mannequin.
It's a classic psychological defense.
Oh.
Processing fluency. When we see something that just completely violates our understanding of reality, like, a body in a vacant lot,
Right.
our brains scramble to categorize it as something familiar and harmless. A mannequin, a plaster cast,
Yeah.
store display, anything but what it really is.
Right. She thinks it's trash, maybe from a department store, but then she gets a little closer.
And the details start to come into focus.
She sees the jet black hair against the green of the weeds. She sees the way the skin is so terribly unnaturally pale, and then that mental filter it shatters.
She realizes this isn't a mannequin.
It's a human body, a young woman, and she has been severed completely in half at the waist. In that instant, Betty Bersinger grabs her daughter, physically turns her away to shield her from the horror, and just runs to a neighbor's house to call the police.
And with that one phone call, the clock starts ticking on what is, you could argue it's the most famous and certainly the most sensationalized unsolved murder in California history.
The Black Dahlia case.
The Black Dahlia.
But here's the thing we want to establish right up front. Today, we're not just here to retell a ghost story or a piece of Hollywood folklore. We are doing a reanalysis.
Yes.
We're going to try and strip away all the layers of noir mythos, the fedoras and the femme fatales, and treat this as what it is, a forensic puzzle. We're going to look at the tragic life of the victim, Elizabeth Short, through a lens of facts, not fiction.
And then, and this is where things get really wild, we're going to look at a stack of new evidence, some of it developed through AI-cracked ciphers, that suggests this 1947 murder might actually be the origin story for a serial killer who wouldn't become a household name until the late 1960s.
We are talking about the Zodiac Killer.
It's a huge leap, and it's a controversial theory, for sure. But when you start to look at the source material we have today, the geography, the specific medical connections, the handwriting, it's a thread that is absolutely worth pulling. It might just unravel the whole thing.
But before we can even get to the Zodiac, we have to understand the world Elizabeth Short was living and dying in. So let's set the stage. Post-war Los Angeles, January 1947. What does that city feel like?
It's a city of extreme dualities. On one hand, you've got this incredible surge of manifest destiny. The war is over. GIs are coming home in droves. The aircraft industry is booming. Hollywood's in a golden age. It's the city of dreams.
But there's a dark underbelly.
A very dark one. Underneath all that glitter, it is a city of deep systemic corruption.
This is the era of the gangster squad, right? We're not talking about the movie. We're talking about the real thing.
Precisely. The LAPD at this time had a justifiably terrible reputation for brutality and, well, for being on the take. The gangster squad was a real unit, and it operated completely outside the law to protect casino interests or, powerful people's vice operations.
But the homicide guys were different.
Well, this is the important distinction for our case. The homicide squad itself was actually considered elite. These weren't amateurs. They were highly skilled, hardened detectives, but they were completely and totally overwhelmed.
I saw a statistic in the research notes that just blew my mind. On the very same day that Elizabeth Short's body was discovered, January 15th, 1947, what else was on the police blotter?
It was chaos, a completely chaotic day. So besides the Dahlia discovery, which became this massive media event, Los Angeles also reported 2 other totally unrelated murders and 13 armed robberies.
13 in one day.
In one day. Crime was just surging. The city's infrastructure was crumbling under the weight of this massive population boom. So into this chaotic, booming, dangerous city walks Elizabeth Short.
And I feel like we really need to pause here for a second and talk about her, the person. Because pop culture, especially fiction, has done a real number on her reputation.
It really has. For decades, the dominant narrative, and this was driven largely by fiction, like James Ellroy's novel The Black Dahlia or the film True Confessions, was that Elizabeth Short was a call girl, a prostitute who prowled Hollywood Boulevard looking for men.
But when you actually go back and look at the real files, the 1949 grand jury records, the incredible research by journalist Larry Harnish, that story just doesn't hold up, does it?
Not even a little bit.
Yeah.
There is absolutely zero credible evidence that she was ever a prostitute. The grand jury specifically looked for it because, frankly, it would have made the case easier to solve. A John, a pimp, easy motives. They found nothing. She wasn't street walking, she was. She was drifting. And there's a huge, huge difference between those two things.
And even the name, the Black Dahlia.
Yeah.
The myth is that she wore these sheer black clothes and dyed her hair jet black to live like a femme fatale, to seduce men.
The reality is so much more grounded and, honestly, more relatable. In mid-1946, she was hanging out at a drugstore in Long Beach. It was just a local spot. The other customers there, and actually a local vice cop, they started calling her Black Dahlia. As kind of a joke.
A joke?
Yeah. It was a play on the movie The Blue Dahlia, which was a huge hit at the time, and the simple fact that she had naturally black hair and often wore black clothing. Why? Because she couldn't afford a diverse wardrobe. It wasn't some stage name she invented. It was a nickname given to her by locals that the press later ran with.
So if she wasn't this mysterious, seductive femme fatale, who was she?
She was a tragedy long before she was ever a murder victim. She was born in Boston, in the Hyde Park area, on July 29, 1924. She was the middle of 5 daughters, and her entire life really was defined by abandonment.
It starts with the father, right? Cleo Short?
Cleo Short. He built miniature golf courses, which is this huge fad, until the Depression hit. In 1930, he lost everything, and one day, he parked his car on a bridge, left it there, and just vanished.
And everyone assumed he'd killed himself.
They did. The family, the police, they all thought he had jumped. He faked his own suicide.
I just can't imagine doing that to your family. Leaving your wife and 5 daughters to fend for themselves in the absolute depths of the Great Depression.
It's unbelievably cruel. And then years later, he just resurfaces out in California. He writes a letter to the family saying, "Hey, I'm alive."
So Elizabeth, who's a teenager at this point, decides to go find him.
Yes. In 1942, she moves all the way across the country to Vallejo, California, to reunite with him. You have to imagine she probably thought she was finally getting her dad back after all those years.
But that's not what happened at all.
No, he didn't want a daughter. He wanted a housekeeper. He treated her terribly. They fought constantly, and she moved out. That really kicked off her years of drifting up and down California.
But the real blow, the thing that seems to have really untethered her from any kind of stability, came in 1945.
It did. She was engaged to a man named Major Matthew Michael Gordon, Jr. He was a pilot in the Experimental Air Commandos, a decorated war hero.
And he died.
In a plane crash over in India. It was August of 1945. Just days, literally days, before the war in the Pacific ended. She received the telegram about his death, and by all accounts, it absolutely crushed her.
You can see it in her timeline.
You can. If you look at her movements after that, she unmoors, she drifts from Florida to Chicago back to Los Angeles. She stops working regular jobs. She's just surviving, moving from one friend's couch to another, relying on the kindness of strangers.
Which brings us directly to the missing week. This is the black hole in the investigation that has driven detectives and researchers crazy for, almost 80 years now?
It's the critical period. It starts January 9, 1947. She's down in San Diego with a man named Robert Red Manley. He's a married salesman she'd been seeing, though by his account and others, the relationship was platonic. He was just helping her out.
And he gives her a ride.
He drives her up to Los Angeles. He drops her off at the magnificent Biltmore Hotel right in downtown L.A. She tells him she's there to meet her sister.
Which was a complete lie.
A total lie. Her sister was back in Boston. She most likely just wanted a ride into the city in a warm, respectable place to sit for a while before figuring out her next move. Manley leaves her there in the lobby. The last sort of reliable sighting of her is allegedly at the Crown Grill, a cocktail lounge nearby.
And then nothing.
Poof. She's gone. From the evening of January 9th to the morning of January 15th, when Betty Bersinger finds her body, Elizabeth Short vanishes from the face of the earth.
And when she reappears, it's in that vacant lot on South Norton Avenue.
Yeah.
And We have to talk about the state of the body because the brutality here is so specific. It's not random. It tells us something very important about the killer's mindset and, crucially, his capabilities.
It does. This wasn't a frenzy of violence in some dark alley. This was calculated. This was a performance. First, you have the bisection. The body was cut completely in half between the second and third lumbar vertebrae.
And this is what's known as a hemicorporectomy, right?
Correct. And the sources are all very clear on this. This wasn't a hack job. This wasn't done with an axe or a simple saw. It was a clean, precise cut. It suggested someone who knew anatomy. Hemicorporectomy was a real, albeit rare, surgical procedure. It was actually a technique taught in some medical schools back in the 1930s.
You have to know exactly where to cut to separate the spine that cleanly.
Exactly. You need skill, you need knowledge,
Right.
and then there's the blood. Or rather, a complete lack of it.
That's maybe the most chilling part of the entire scene.
It is. The body was completely exsanguinated, drained of all blood. That's why she looked so pale, so much like a mannequin or a marble statue.
Yeah.
And critically, there was almost no blood at the crime scene itself.
Which proves she wasn't killed there?
Not a chance. She was killed and drained somewhere else, somewhere private, somewhere with, as we said, running water and a drain, a bathroom, a basement, maybe a medical facility. And then she was transported to the lot, scrubbed. The killer used gasoline or a similar solvent to wash the body. Now, on one level, that removes forensic evidence like fingerprints or trace DNA, but on another psychological level, it sanitizes the act in this deeply disturbing way.
And after all that,
The posing.
Arms raised over her head, elbows bent at right angles, legs spread apart, her intestines had been removed and then tucked neatly under her buttocks. This was ritualistic.
And the face. The Glasgow smile.
Horrific. Lacerations from the corners of her mouth extending almost to her ears. It's a signature of sorts. A horrific disfigurement, intended to shock and to terrorize whoever found her.
So if we build a profile just from this, we're looking for a killer who has access to a private place to do this work, who has the time hours, probably to drain and clean a body. He has the physical strength to transport two halves of a body. And he has the icy coldness to meticulously pose it in a residential neighborhood for anyone to find. And he left almost no useful physical evidence at the scene itself. I mean, they found a heel print, they found some tire tracks, but nothing that led to a definitive suspect. There was a cement sack with some watery blood found nearby, but again, it was a dead end.
The police are stumped. They have a body but no scene, a victim but no timeline. But the media goes into an absolute frenzy.
And this is where the story gets dark in a whole different way. Not just because of the murder, but because of how it was handled by the press.
Yeah.
You had the Los Angeles Examiner and the Herald Express, both owned by William Randolph Hearst, and they were in this bitter, no-holds-barred war for readership.
They didn't just report the news, they actively inserted themselves into the investigation.
Oh, they became part of the story.
Yeah.
Examiner reporters were actually beating the police to potential leads, trampling evidence. It was a circus.
And they were the ones who actually used technology to identify her, right?
Well,
because there was no ID on the body.
That's right. They got her fingerprints from the morgue and used something called a sound photo machine. They used basically a primitive fax machine to transmit the prints to the FBI in Washington, D.C.
And because she'd been arrested once for underage drinking in Santa Barbara in '43 and had applied for a government job at Camp Cook, her prints were on file.
Bingo. They got a positive ID in 56 minutes.
That is unbelievably fast for 1947. But what they did with that information, well, it's just unforgivable.
It is the absolute rock bottom of journalistic ethics. An Examiner rewrite man named Wayne Sutton gets the assignment to call Elizabeth's mother, Phoebe Short, back in Boston. He doesn't tell her that her daughter is dead.
He tells her Elizabeth has won a beauty contest.
Beauty contest. I mean, can you even process the cruelty of that? He gets the mother talking, all proud and happy and excited for her daughter.
And he's just pumping her for information.
Exactly. He's getting all the background information, childhood stories, her hopes, her dreams, everything he needs for his exclusive story. And only after he has milked her for every last detail does he drop the bomb that her daughter has been brutally murdered and mutilated.
It was done purely to get the scoop before the competition could. It's monstrous.
It is, and the reporters didn't stop there. They found her suitcases at a bus station luggage hold before the cops even knew to look there. They were actively obstructing the investigation for headlines.
And then the killer decides he wants in on the media game.
He decides to join the conversation. On January 21st, the editor of the Examiner, a man named James Richardson, gets a phone call at his office.
And it's the killer.
The person on the other end claims to be the killer. He has this sort of calm, mocking tone. He congratulates Richardson on the paper's coverage of the murder and says to expect some souvenirs in the mail.
And he wasn't bluffing.
Not at all. On January 24th, a manila envelope arrives at the newspaper, and the address is made up of letters cut and pasted from magazines and newspapers, that classic ransom note style.
What's inside?
Inside, there's Elizabeth's birth certificate, some of her business cards, photos, and an address book.
The address book belonging to a man named Mark Hansen.
Right. And just like the body had been washed with gasoline, all of the contents of this package had been wiped down with gasoline. Not a single fingerprint. This was a direct taunt to the police. The killer was proving he had her personal effects, proving he was the one, and showing them he was too smart to get caught.
Okay, so this package ignites the investigation. Let's unpack the suspects. Because the LAPD at the peak had 750 investigators on this. They interviewed hundreds of men.
It was a massive dragnet. They were checking storm drains, abandoned buildings. They interviewed every single man whose name was in that address book. They were desperate.
So let's start with the owner of the book, Mark Hansen.
Mark Hansen was a prominent nightclub and movie theater owner. He was wealthy, well-connected to the Hollywood scene. Elizabeth had stayed at his house for a short time with a group of other young women.
And the theory was what? A crime of passion?
The theory was that she had rejected his advances, and he snapped. But honestly, he was cleared pretty quickly. He had an alibi that, while not airtight, held up. And frankly, the crime scene, the surgical precision, the planning, it just didn't match the profile of a jilted nightclub owner in a sudden fit of rage.
Okay, so he's out. Then we move to the heavy hitters of the Standard Theory Club.
Yeah.
Let's talk about Dr. George Hodel.
This is probably the most famous and compelling theory for a lot of people. It's the evil genius theory. Dr. George Hodel was a brilliant physician, a surgeon with a genius-level IQ. He was also deeply involved in the surrealist art scene, famously lived in the Soden House, that Mayan temple-looking place in L.A.
And he had a very dark history.
Incredibly dark. He was accused of molesting his own daughter, Tamar. He was acquitted in a very sensational trial, but his reputation was absolutely destroyed.
And the police suspected him in the Dahlia case, enough to bug his house.
They did. In 1950, the DA's office put a bug in his home. And this is the smoking gun for so many people.
Mm-hmm.
On the wiretap, he is recorded saying, and I'm quoting here, "Supposing I did kill the Black Dahlia, they couldn't prove it now. They can't talk to my secretary because she's dead."
Chills. Every single time I hear that quote, it's horrifying.
It's incredibly compelling. His own son, Steve Hodel, who became an LAPD homicide detective himself, has written a whole series of books claiming his father was the killer. He points to the surgical skill. George was a surgeon. He points to the posing of the body, claiming it mimics surrealist art, like Man Ray's photograph, The Minotaur.
It's a very neat, very cinematic theory, but he wasn't the only doctor on the suspect list. There was also Dr. Walter Bailey.
Right, Dr. Bailey fits what you might call the local theory. He was a surgeon who lived just one single block from where the body was found on South Norton Avenue.
One block. Wow,
Wow.
and there's a loose connection to Elizabeth's family, isn't there?
A very loose one. His daughter apparently knew Elizabeth Short's sister. The theory, which is pushed mostly by researcher Larry Harnish, is that Elizabeth might have sought him out for some kind of medical help. Maybe an abortion, though there's no proof of that.
And the motive?
The motive is tied to Bailey's deteriorating mental state. He had a degenerative brain disease at the time. The idea is that he killed her in a confused state and then, in a moment of spite, dumped her body right near his estranged wife's home, which was also nearby, specifically to terrorize his wife.
And there's a weird date-related coincidence there, too.
There is, a very strange one. Elizabeth disappeared on January 9th. Dr. Bailey's son had died in a violent accident years prior on January 13th. The body appears on January 15th. So the entire timeline of the murder sits right in that anniversary window of his personal grief and potential mental decline.
So we have the surrealist, evil genius doctor and the deteriorating local surgeon. For decades, those have been the main theories. But now we have to turn the page. Because there is a new theory. A truly wild one. One that connects this 1947 Hollywood noir mystery to the terror of the late 1960s in Northern California.
This is where we have to seriously look at the potential connection to the Zodiac Killer.
Now, for anyone listening who knows their true crime, the Zodiac is, the guy in the executioner's hood up in the Bay Area, late 60s. He sent ciphers to the newspapers. He taunted police. He targeted and killed couples. How in the world do we get from the Black Dahlia in 1947 to the Zodiac 20 years later?
We get there through a man named Marvin Margulis, a man who later changed his name to Marvin Merrill.
And this entire connection hinges on a recent breakthrough from civilian investigations using AI to crack one of the Zodiac's long unsolved ciphers. We need to talk about the Z13.
Okay, so the Zodiac sent 4 main ciphers to the press. The Z408 was solved pretty quickly. The Z340 was cracked in 2020. But the Z13, which is a tiny 13-character cipher that literally starts with the words, "My name is," that one remained a mystery for decades.
Why was it so hard to solve?
It's just too short. You can't use standard frequency analysis. There are just too many possibilities for what the letters could be. It was considered unsolvable.
Until a researcher named Alex Barber brought in AI.
Exactly. This researcher, Alex Barber, or Barbu, used an AI program to basically brute force the problem. He had it crunch roughly 71 million names against a specific pattern of the Z13 cipher. And after all that, it spit out a single perfect match.
Marvin Merrill?
Marvin Merrill. The letter patterns, the repeating M, the A, the L, the R, they fit the cipher's repeating symbols perfectly.
Okay, so the AI gives us a name. Marvin Merrill. That's a huge step for the Zodiac case. But who is he? And how on earth does he connect back to Elizabeth Short in Los Angeles in 1947?
Well, before he was Marvin Merrill, he was Marvin Margulis. And in 1946 and 1947, a young Marvin Margulis was living in Los Angeles.
And not just living in the same city.
No. According to this line of investigation, he was Elizabeth Short's roommate.
Wait, hold on. Back up. He lived with her.
That is the bombshell claim. He lived in an apartment with Elizabeth Short and another man named Robinson. So if this is true, he had direct daily access to her. He wasn't some stranger stalking her from the shadows. He was in her kitchen. He was in her living room.
Okay, but does he fit the killer's profile? We spent a lot of time talking about the specific surgical skill required for the Dahlia murder.
And here's where it gets even more compelling. Marvin was a Navy corpsman,
A medic.
a combat medic. He would have had the exact kind of anatomical knowledge and hands-on surgical training required to perform a hemicorporectomy and to drain the body of blood efficiently. He knew how to handle trauma. He knew how to handle bodies.
Okay, that is a massive, massive red flag. A combat medic roommate. But the theory goes further. There are supposedly physical clues at the 1947 scene that point to the name Zodiac 2, right? This is the part that really gave me goosebumps.
There are. And this is where it gets really, really strange. Near the crime scene on South Norton, about 4 minutes away, investigators at the time found an ice bag. Just a standard hotel ice pack. But it had the letter Z marked on it in grease pencil.
A Z in 1947, 20 years before the Zodiac started his campaign.
Right. At the time, they figured it was just an initial. Delivery drivers or hotels would mark bags with initials for their clients. But when modern researchers looked at old maps, they found something incredible. There was a motel located just north of the crime scene. It was called the Zodiac Auto Court.
You are kidding me, the Zodiac Motel.
It's the Zodiac Motel. It was right there, just north of the dump site. And get this, on the night of the murder, a witness reported seeing a suspicious black sedan parked in that exact vicinity and hearing a woman screaming.
So the theory is, Marvin, the medic roommate, kills her, perhaps at the Zodiac Motel, which would explain the Z on the ice bag used to transport something, and then he dumps her body nearby.
Exactly. And the speculation, and it is speculation, is that years later, when he begins his killing spree up in the Bay Area, he adopts the name Zodiac, not just because of some astrological whim, but as a secret callback to his masterpiece, to the location of his very first kill, the Zodiac Motel.
That connects the dots in a way that is almost too perfect to be a coincidence. But is there more? What about the handwriting? The taunting letters were a signature of both killers.
Handwriting analysis is always a bit subjective, of course, but experts who were cited in this investigation claim there's a very high probability match between Marvin's known handwriting and the famous Zodiac letters. Specifically, they point to the way he formed the letter M. It was very distinct, and it matches the Zodiac's M.
And the timeline of the Zodiac letters themselves. There's a famous gap in his correspondence, isn't there?
There is. It's a huge mystery in Zodiacology. He writes all these frantic, taunting letters, and then suddenly there's a complete silence. A 3-year gap from 1971 to 1974. People have always wondered, did he die? Did he move away? Was he in prison?
And where was Marvin Merrill during that time?
Public records show that Marvin Merrill was incarcerated and then on probation for fraud during exactly that 3-year period. The letters stopped when he went in, and they resumed in 1974, right after his probation ended. It fits the incarceration gap theory perfectly.
This is a lot. But the most visual and maybe the most disturbing piece of evidence is the painting. Tell me about the painting.
This is the real cherry on top of this whole theory. In 1992, just a year before Marvin Merrill died, he painted a portrait of a woman. He titled it simply Elizabeth.
Elizabeth, okay.
The painting shows a woman with dark hair, but she has specific injuries depicted on her body, cuts, mutilations. And these painted injuries are an exact match for the specific details of Elizabeth Short's autopsy report, details that were never released to the public.
So he painted things only the killer would know.
Specifically, the mutilation of one of her breasts and the way a piece of flesh was carved from her thigh where her rose tattoo had been. He painted the autopsy details.
That's essentially a confession.
It looks like one, but it gets even stranger. When researchers got a high-resolution scan of this painting and started analyzing the layers and the shadings, specifically under the woman's arm, they alleged that there is a hidden word embedded in the paint strokes.
Let me guess what it is.
Zodiac.
Wow. So at the end of his life, he paints his first victim, Elizabeth. He includes the secret details of the injuries he inflicted on her, and he signs it with his hidden moniker.
It looks like a deathbed confession on canvas. A final arrogant boast.
So let's step back and synthesize this for a moment. What does this all mean if it's true? We have the Black Dahlia in 47 and the Zodiac in the late 60s, two iconic, seemingly separate cases.
But this theory connects them through the killer's MO. In 1947, you have the taunting killer. He sends the victim's personal items to the press. He wipes all the evidence clean. That is pure Zodiac behavior.
Right. The Zodiac sent pieces of Paul Stein's bloody shirt to prove he was the killer. The Dahlia killer sent Elizabeth's birth certificate and address book. Both of them used the media as a tool to amplify their terror. Both used those cut-and-paste letters.
And the professionalism, as you called it. The sanitization of the Dahlia body, the meticulous planning, it suggests a cold, calculated, predatory mind. Not a crime of passion, but a crime of possession and public display. That psychology aligns perfectly with the Zodiac's known desire for control and creating public terror.
It also completely changes how we see Elizabeth Short's final days. She wasn't just a random victim of the big bad city of Hollywood. She might have been the victim of a roommate she knew, a guy named Marvin she probably saw every day.
It grounds the horror. It takes it away from the abstract myth of the Black Dahlia and brings it back to a very real, very terrifying situation. A young woman, alone in the city, living in a crowded apartment with a man who had a profoundly dark side.
And it suggests that these famous cold cases are rarely as isolated as we think they are. We tend to put them in these neat little boxes. This is the Dahlia case. This is the Zodiac case. But criminals have timelines. They have histories. They evolve.
Precisely. If Marvin Merrill is the Zodiac, he didn't just wake up one morning in 1968 and decide to become a cipher-sending supervillain. He developed, he practiced, and Elizabeth Short was, potentially, the beginning of that horrific evolution.
It is absolutely terrifying to think about, that the clue might have been there the whole time, the Z on the ice bag, the roommate who was a combat medic.
And the name Zodiac not being a random astrological choice, but a secret personal reference pointing all the way back to a cheap motel in 1947 Los Angeles.
So here's the final provocative thought we want to leave you with. If the Z13 cipher really does name Marvin Merrill, and if he really was Elizabeth Short's roommate, that leaves a 20-year gap. A huge one, between the Dahlia murder in 1947 and the first confirmed Zodiac attack in the late 60s.
Exactly. What happened in those 20 years?
How many other unsolved murders in that two-decade gap might belong to him? Was he dormant? Or was he just practicing, getting better at his craft? The Black Dahlia might not just be the coldest case in LA history. It might be the opening chapter of a book we are only just now, thanks to new technology and new eyes, learning how to read.
It really raises the question, what other patterns have we missed over the years because we were all looking for the wrong suspect in the wrong way?
We really encourage you to go online and look at the evidence for yourself. Look at the handwriting comparisons. Look at the Z13 solution. Look at that painting of Elizabeth. See what you think.
Because investigating history, especially dark history like this, isn't just about looking at the past. It's about seeing the patterns we all missed the first time around.
That's it for this deep dive. Stay curious.
And stay observant.